We'll see if this works. Hey. Well, thank you. That was a fun. There we go. I think I got a line inside. No, that's the problem. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. Thank you for that warm-up act. I couldn't have asked for anything better. So, yeah, my name's Pete. I've just come back from Kyrgyzstan, where I took part in the first edition of the Silk Road mountain race. Like you heard there, it's a 1,700 kilometre off-road mountain bike race around the Tian Shan mountains. And well, I'll start with this. The other day, last week, I was asked a question, and it kind of echoed the question that had been sort of rattling around my brain for quite a long time on the race. And
McNeil from the Hope Valley in Derbyshire has just returned from the Silk Road mountain race.
I mean, the question has to be,
Why?
what on earth were you thinking? And why? Why take on something like this? 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 Why take on something like
this? So yeah, and this has really become a bit of a focus of mine, I suppose, in the last few weeks, having come back. And I've literally just this minute had a little bit of a rethink about how I'm going to do this talk, and I've just got my little book here which I've gone and scribbled out some stuff in. And my mum made that, by the way. Peter's bright ideas. But I was going to give you a bit of a rundown of the story of the race and how things happened and the kit that I used and what happened sort of day by day. And you know, in that I might have told you some of the stories which came out of the race. You know, one rider who got up to checkpoint 1 and the muscles on his neck had stopped working, so he had to turn his dropped handlebars upside down and ride the remaining 1,500 kilometres like that. And at one stage he was using a toilet roll to prop his chin up to be able to get through the race. Unfortunately, he got a bad stomach issue, and that toilet roll kept on getting smaller and smaller. He wasn't able to keep up. Or I might have told you about the night that I was in my rather cosy 2-man tent, and another rider gate crashed that one-man party because he was panicking that he was getting hypothermic and that, you know, he needed to come in and have a spoon, and we had a very brief discussion about who would be the big spoon and the little spoon. And there are tons of stories like that, and for anyone that has any interest in doing anything like this, then there's tons of advice and tons of you know, kit geekery that I can go through, and if you want any of that, then please come and find me at the bar afterwards. But I'm going to skip through some of that stuff because I think the thing that I want to talk about tonight, and I've just sort of made my mind up about this, is I want to look at this question in a little bit more detail. Why would you do something like this? What makes you want to go and do something like this, and what makes it worth it? So, you know, for me, it's quite a long story, and that story started out quite a few years ago. This is the little Pete at the age of 13, who just had some bloke come into his school and give a talk about how he did a cycle tour in South America. And my jaw hit the floor, and I thought, you know, this is amazing, I want to get involved with this kind of thing. So packed up my bike and headed to the Isle of Wight, and I did a circumnavigation of the Isle of Wight at the age of 13. And that's kind of, things have kept going on from there. A few years ago, I suppose it culminated with my lovely wife Alice there, where we decided to cycle to New Zealand for our honeymoon. So we did 20,000 kilometres, spent 2 years cycling very slowly, meandering our way across the planet to New Zealand. And that taught me some amazing things, and most of what it taught me was about the joys of going slowly, and of meeting people, and of you know, taking your time about things, and you're saying yes to opportunities when they came along. And I became a real advocate of that. And from coming back from that trip, I set up a business, my business called Adventure Pedlars. We're based just over the hill here in the Hope Valley in the Peak District. And our aim is to facilitate people to get out and have their own adventures by bicycle. We feel like it's a really accessible thing for people. You don't want to scare them away with big distances and huge kind of challenges. It can be just as rewarding if you go out and just enjoy yourself. So for the last couple of years, we've run trips out of the Hope Valley, and we've hired out lots of kit and Sonder bikes to lots of people discovering bikepacking for the first time. But personally, I still had this kind of itch to scratch, and that is the let's see how far I can go itch. That's the what happens if itch. And I kind of took up the challenge of this a couple of years ago when I entered the Highland Trail 550. So the Highland Trail is a self-supported bikepacking event. It's a race around the Highlands of Scotland for 550 miles. And it's pretty ridiculous. It's taking your bike to places that you really wouldn't want to take a bike to. You know, I've often described it as rather than a bike race, it's a race with a bike, and there is an important difference in those two places. Because there's a lot of carrying and a lot of pushing and shoving. But what I found in that context was something that I suppose I'd probably missed a little bit elsewhere, and that is the sort of flow you get into when you just pass through a landscape, you've got your blinkers on, and you just head down racing. Yeah, you're not stopping and you're not kind of interacting with locals in the same way as you would do when you're cycle touring, but it gives you a total different headspace. You know, I felt like I was a river flowing through the landscape, and you know, it really appealed to me, and it certainly kind of tapped into something in my consciousness that I really needed to get to. So I came back again the next year, this year, came back and did the Highland Trail again. But this was all in a kind of build-up, because I'd heard of this Silk Road mountain race, and I really wanted to get involved with that. So the Highland Trail this year was supposed to be part of my preparation, and I had this whole plan down that I'd do it, and then 2 months later I'd kind of keep my fitness, and then I'd head out to Kyrgyzstan. Unfortunately, I got a bit overexcited at the Highland Trail this year, and I cooked a little bit too hot, I suppose. I rode the last 32 hours straight. And this picture was taken at the finish line, and yeah, I had an amazing time and a really interesting experience of going very deep into places which I'd not really thought about very much before in my head, but physically I overcooked it, and I spent the next 2 weeks with my lovely physio wife here, next 2 months, sorry, just recovering from it really. So I did absolutely no training or preparation other than just kind of getting my body working again after the Highland 550. So I kind of came into the Silk Road race, Silk Road mountain race, pretty cold I suppose in some ways, and it was the first edition. No one had ever done this route before, not in its entirety, and it was unknown to a lot of people. Nelson, the organiser, came from the background of doing the Transcontinental race, which is a road race across Europe, and he brought a lot of people who are sort of from that background along to do this kind of thing. But what you find with road riders is that, you know, gravel is really big, serious off-road to them. So, you know, people came expecting a gravel race. I'd been to Kyrgyzstan before. We stopped in on Kyrgyzstan when we were cycling through on the way to New Zealand, and now I realised what the roads were like there. You know, even the good roads, you might be washboard, you know, very rough, rocky surfaces. So, you know, my preparation was kind of aiming a little bit more at comfort. But that's the route there. It's like I said, 1,700 kilometre route. There's 26,000 metres of ascent in that, and you know, a fair few spikes where it gets up to nearly 4,000 metres. So it's quite a serious undertaking. The setup of the race was a little different to the kind of the existing self-supported races, in that it needed to be a little bit more supported, because whilst in the States or in Scotland you can pick up your phone and you can call mountain rescue or the emergency services, those things don't exist in Kyrgyzstan, and they actually crashed their last helicopter a couple of months ago. So there was really no backup other than what was supplied by the race organisers. So Outkit sponsored them to have a few checkpoints. They had 3 checkpoints, the little blue dots there on the way around the route, where you had to check in, and you could also get a hot meal, and you knew there was going to be someone there to kind of you know, to meet you. And they also had a few support vehicles, some of the old sort of Soviet Bukhanka trucks out on the race route, and we bumped into them on occasion. But other than that, you're completely self-supported. And you know, you can see the broken roads that I took up at the front here. It looked a little unusual on the starting line, I'm not going to lie. There was a lot of people there on some very flashy drop bar gravel bikes, skinny tyres, rigid forks, and I was aware that I was probably going quite conservative. That kind of came true as well with my kit choices. I was taking a tent as opposed to a bivvy bag. A nice warm sleeping bag. I was taking a stove and some meals. All the sort of things which you might choose to leave behind if you're in a kind of comfortable European environment for racing. But out there, I knew that if anything happened, I may be sitting there for 2 days before I was going to get collected. So I wanted to be safe and I wanted to be comfortable. I didn't really realise that this might actually lead to some form of success. But it turned out that kit choice sort of did. So I'm going to move on to some of the days out now. You hopefully get a bit of an impression by these little clips which I made on the way around.
First day of Silk Road mountain race has ended a little prematurely, a little frustratingly. Got caught in a pretty heavy thunderstorm up at 3,000 metres on the first pass, and stopped and put my tent up, and everything got quite wet in the process. And about 20 minutes after we did that, the rain stopped. So I guess we can just start mega early in the morning.
So that's me. The first pass was really make or break. It was a pretty big old pass. It was 3,800 metres, which you're coming at pretty much cold. Some people have been out there for a little bit of time beforehand to acclimatise. I didn't really manage that. I got there 2 days before the race started. But I had spent a little bit of time at altitude a couple of weeks earlier, so I was hoping that there was going to be enough red blood cells running around my system for that. And it was there, I suppose, it made sense to have a big difficult pass early on in the race, because if anyone was going to have problems, it was better to have problems up near the capital of Bishkek. If you were going to have to turn back, that was the time to do it, because once you got over it, you're out in some pretty wild and remote places. So everyone sort of pressed off, and I suppose my internal feeling was that if I was going to do all right in this race, I needed to get over that pass in the first day. And that was my little mental thought in the back of my head. And I suppose I was doing all right for that, and it got to about 5 o'clock, and we were climbing up at about 3,000 metres, and this horrendous rainstorm started. And big showers of rain coming down, and lightning bolts, actually seeing them hit the ground in front of you. And I went past a group of people, other riders had decided to stop, and they were all setting up their tents and having shelter. And I thought, well, that's probably a good idea, but no, I'm not one of them, I'm going to carry on. And then I got a little bit further on, got to another group of riders who decided to stop and put up their shelter. And I thought, I recognised a few of them, and I thought, they know what they're doing. So I'm going to do the same as that. So I stopped and I set up my tent, and all my kit got absolutely drenched while I was doing that. But I got my shelter up and I got inside, and I was sheltered from this rainstorm. And like I said there in the film, 20 minutes later, that rain stopped. And I was left at 6 o'clock in the evening, which was way before when I was thinking that I would stop on that first night, on the wrong side of the pass, not really knowing what to do. Should I keep going? Or and that would mean taking my tent down and maybe putting it up again later, so that was going to cost me about an hour. Or should I just sleep there and make the most of it? Well, I decided on a kind of mixture of the two. My body clock was a bit messed up from the flight in anyway, so I decided if I was going to have a sleep, I could sleep from 6 in the evening till midnight, and then I would get up at midnight and ride over the pass at night. And it actually proved to be a really good idea. The rain had obviously stopped by that stage, and I had a fantastic evening riding by myself up into the clouds with only the stars for company, and it put me in an interesting headspace. And I've learned from previous racing that the worst time of day is when the sun comes up. And not even racing, just going out on a night out. The worst time of day is where you feel like you've made a mistake, is when the sun comes up. And so I was going to be clever and I was going to avoid this dawn blues. And so at 5 o'clock in the morning, I kind of laid my sleeping bag out and just had a sleep at the side of the road. So that was my victory Snickers at the top of the pass, with only my bike to witness it. You'll see a bit of a theme with that coming along. And yeah, this was my little bivvy spot on the other side. And I slept for an hour, woke up at 6, having passed a whole ton of riders in the night. And at that stage, that kind of felt important. It still felt like a race. In the grand scheme of things, all of that mattered not one jot really in the end. But it felt good to have made it over the pass, felt good to have hit that first goal. So then it was kind of moving into the second day. And I had a fantastic landscape to wake up to. It really went into the sort of the Kyrgyzstan that you imagine, these vast open steppes with nomadic herders kind of herding their horses out there. And having come over that pass at the night, when the sun came up in the morning, this is where I found myself. It was like a magical kingdom. So I'll move on to the second day. Day two, again, it was done at a pretty fast pace, and that was largely down to the fact that we were faced with about 100 kilometres of downhill to begin with, and that seemed brilliant to begin with, but it ended up getting quite tiresome as you sort of just keep on trying to get the most out of the terrain, and making our way down to what would be the first shop that you saw there, and that shop was pretty typical of the sort of resupply points that we found out on the race. I think I managed to get a packet of Chinese noodles, some iced tea and a chocolate bar, and that was about it. So that was my tea that night, and it was pretty well appreciated. You saw there was a couple of other riders around then, and certainly at that beginning stage of the race, you were bumping into other people, and for me that was one of the great things about doing a race like this, was that there were people from all over the world. That guy in the clip there, that was Josh, he's from New Zealand, and he was great fun to ride with, but everyone's there under their own steam and they're all there independently. So when I got a puncture, off Josh goes, and I thought I might not see him again. As it turned out, after the long descent, I came into a pretty long climb coming out of... After that long descent, came into a pretty long climb into this little southern loop on the course, and I've tried to find that I get quite a lot of energy later on at night. I'm not quite sure why it happens, but sort of 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, I start to feel like I'm pretty psyched for riding. So I think I'd just go with it and I carry on. So I carried on up this really long pass, and I got to the top, only to find Josh, who was delirious and completely knackered, gibbering away to himself. And so we decided we'd camp down there that night, and we woke up again, having got somewhere in the dark. You don't quite realise how beautiful the view outside your tent is in the morning. And we woke up that morning to it's actually my birthday. So we had a bit of a celebration up there.
It's been my birthday today. Ridden pretty long and hard. Started off in some beautiful rugged valleys, and then ended up on the road. How's it going? and just pelted along the road, getting covered in dust.
Alaikum salam.
This is my birthday meal, and I have, ooh, check it out, some noodles. Yeah, I can't say a huge amount for the service or the quality of the food, but the view, well, the view's pretty good.
So that took me around this little southern loop here, and that was, again, it was a kind of a test, because it would have been much easier to just go along this road here and cut out that southern loop. But again, some people at that stage, I found out later, they thought they'd had enough of racing by then, and that's what they decided to do. They'd take that shortcut, putting them out of the race, and then they'd be touring. There'd be a group of people touring around Kyrgyzstan. I was kind of oblivious to all this happening at the time, but over those first couple of days, we had a lot of people pull out and scratch as part of the race. But I pushed on, and I was hoping to push on to checkpoint 1, that blue dot there, on that sort of birthday day. But like I said, it started with a celebratory breakfast. I had pork and beans, and took my time with my sunshine view in the morning. It was a bit of a lazy morning with Josh, and met Josh and Phil up at the top, and these guys were great to ride with. Really good fun, and I felt like I'd probably stick with them for quite a long time, and it'd be a social ride, is the way I was feeling right then. But then I was faced with these amazing double track trails that came down on these really secluded valleys, and on the bike that I had, I just flew down these things. I was able to go a lot faster than them, and it turned out didn't really see Josh and Phil again. I saw Josh briefly at checkpoint 1, but other than that, we didn't see them until the finish. So what you think might be a nice kind of comfortable environment of riding with other people can just very quickly change into you being by yourself, and that kind of made itself clear when I pulled into the first proper town. This was Chayk. I knew there was going to be resupply here, so I knew I was going to stop. But I was expecting there to be other riders, people in front of me that stopped at cafes and things, and there'd be people to join with and have a bit of a chat about how the race was going. And there was no one there. No, the place was devoid of any other Silk Road riders, and that sort of made me realise that I probably was riding between two fairly distinct groups, and that's kind of how it panned out for the first few days. I was, if I'd have slowed down, I would have met people. If I'd have sped up, I would have met people. But as it turned out, I was kind of there somewhere in the middle, and it let me have a huge amount of time riding by myself, which was great, but it also had its challenges. This is what stopped me going up to the checkpoint 1. Is I met Nelson there, the organizer. He came up in one of the support vehicles and had a quick chat with me, and I said that I was planning to go up to checkpoint 1, and he said, I don't think so. Checkpoint 1 was at the top of a massive hiker bike, really long, slow push of a climb, and you can see there my lights were on. It was just getting dark, so it didn't seem like the right time to do that, and he was like, no, I don't think it is. So I slept down at the bottom and headed up towards checkpoint 1. I was hoping for breakfast the next morning. It turned out it was a pretty tough climb.
My dear chap, politics is a conspiracy.
So that's day 4 and 5 together there, and you could probably tell it was a pretty tough climb up to that lake, that Song Kul, where that first checkpoint was. And the checkpoints were brilliant. There were these yurt camps where the locals were inviting you into the yurts, and they would give you an amazing array of food, which after sort of 4 days out on the hills, it was a fantastic, fantastic experience to be just kind of looked after, but it made it very tough to leave. And yeah, again, I was sort of between 2 groups, so I was there pretty much by myself. There was some volunteers manning the checkpoints and signing you in on the card. But I was there just to kind of gorge myself, and ended up sort of meeting a couple of the other riders and doing my stretches, which Alice, my wife, will be very proud that I did my stretches on the race. But it became a really important part of it for me. I don't think my body would have kept going if I hadn't have kind of kept doing that little bit of maintenance on it and stretching out various kind of tight points. But I like that picture. And then this is what we were faced with afterwards. I had to take that picture because it's just the most incredible downhill. All gravel track and just tucked and flied. And, again, on that bike, I could get down on my aero bars and really just, absolutely fly along. The problem is, from the aero bar position, you don't have access to the brakes. So I had to be quite good at sort of jumping between the two of them. And then I made my way through another big town called Batov, and it felt really weird, to be honest. I later found out that it was a national holiday there, and everything was kind of closed up. But I was passing through this town, which it just didn't feel very welcoming. All the shops were closed. It felt in a lot of disrepair, and I wasn't that comfortable about stopping. And so I kind of rode straight through, and got to the other side. I was really hungry. I kind of really wanted to stop and get myself some food. But I got to the other side and I kind of sat down and I thought, had a bit of food, because I always make better decisions once I've eaten something. So I had a bit of food and looked at the map and realised that it was 450 kilometres until my next resupply point. And so there really wasn't an option. I had to go and resupply in Betov. So I turned my bike around and I rode back into town. And I went and stocked up on noodles and fruit and dried apricots and Snickers, and then rode back out of town again. And I'm pretty glad I did, because the landscape changed dramatically as I rode out. This is with a rider called John, who I was riding out with. John was super tough. He was an old fella. Well, he is an old fella. And he just kept on going. Every time I saw John, he would look in a worse state. And every time I thought, that's the last time I'm going to see you, John. And then 3 days later, he'd pop up again, like having kind of chased me down over that length of time. He was an absolute man of steel. But we rode off into this desert landscape, and very quickly there was no water, and really nothing very much there. So rode on there out into the night. I camped up at the top of a pass and had a kind of chilly, sunny morning coming down the next side, and I felt like having this sort of habit occurring of needing to stop for a decent breakfast. So stopped down by the first river actually that I found to get a decent breakfast there. And then very quickly this happened. Came to the first bit and the only bit of good tarmac on the entire race route. In fact, it sort of makes me laugh. I saw an article that came out, not to my knowing, the other day, which was from the Matlock Mercury, if you know, just down the road. And my favourite line from that article said, "Some of the route involves cycling along roads which had fallen into disrepair." I'll remind you of that statement a little bit later on when you see some of the mistakes of the terrain that we had to cross. But yeah, this was a road, and what's more, I had a fantastic tailwind, and this tailwind just kicked up behind me, and I just, I felt like I had to make the most of it. So tunes on, lots of sugar inside me, and head down and just race towards the Chinese border. At the Chinese border, I bumped into another rider, Bass. Me and Bass would cross paths quite a lot between this time and towards the finish. But we continued with this tailwind, but it changed to this very rugged washboard gravel. If you went fast enough, that was all right, because you sort of skipped over the top of it. But if you slowed down, then it really caught you out, and you started to get caught in every rut, and it really wasn't very comfortable. So we continued to push it really hard, and all of this with the tailwind and the tarmac and having to push it. I covered 250 kilometres that day, and it absolutely broke me. But I couldn't slow down because it was more uncomfortable to slow down than it was to keep going. So I pressed on and eventually made it that same day up to checkpoint 2, which is another yurt camp in an absolutely stunning location. Incidentally, that's one of the buhankas, that's one of the support vehicles that they had from the Silk Road Mountain Race, and you'd be amazed at where those things could make it to. So yeah, I mean, the lure of a hot meal and you know, a bit of company was very strong to get up to the checkpoints, and they were like a kind of port in a storm. So very keen to get up there, and glad that I did. But it was a cold night once we got up there.
Yeah, it's been a tough day today. I think day 6 and the fatigue is getting to me a bit. I could do with a good night's sleep. Stopped at checkpoint 2 last night, and yeah, just been alone with my thoughts a lot today. But yeah, just came over a massive 30k climb down into this beautiful valley. Debating whether or not to push on tonight to Batov, but I don't think I will. I think I'll have a better night's sleep in the tent. So this is going to be home for the night. It's pretty good.
So day 6, after leaving checkpoint 2, was a bit of a low point for me. I really struggled this day. And in fact, this is signified by the only picture I took this day was of the dried cheese and oatcakes which I had in my tent that evening. Yeah, I think 6 days riding, racing, with your head down and the blinkers on is okay. But to be faced with the same again afterwards, for me, one of the biggest battles in this race was the psychology of why am I doing it. There's one thing to kind of push yourself, but when you're riding through amazing landscapes and amazing cultures, which you really want to stop and enjoy, you don't feel like you can enjoy them because you've got your head down and you're racing. And I think this kind of came to a head on this day, day 6. I spent a little bit of time chatting with some other riders who'd scratched from the race up at checkpoint 2, and really I found that a lot of the reasons why they were scratching was because they felt like they were wasting an opportunity. They wanted to tour in Kyrgyzstan. They wanted to experience the culture. They didn't want to just punish themselves going through the landscape. And that really resonated with me. That's exactly how I was feeling at that space and time. I suppose it helped that I'd been there before, so it didn't feel like my one and only chance to have experienced that part of the world. But I certainly felt like there was questions about what I was doing and why I was doing it, and I felt like the only real answer was to try and take my foot off the gas, try and be a bit kinder to myself. But that's very difficult when you've got really long distances to cover. So yeah, it's hard to be kind to yourself when you're doing a 30-kilometre climb. So I suppose I just carried on. It almost felt like to my detriment I carried on. At that stage, I felt like I just didn't have the guts to make the decision not to carry on. So I carried on. And that was the mindset that I was in, really. But I knew that I needed to be a bit kinder to myself, so I stopped relatively early and had a good night's sleep. And it's amazing what things feel like in the morning.
It's 7:30. Believe it or not, that is a massive lie-in on the Silk Road Mountain Race. I had to stop for a good amount of time because I just needed to look after my body, look after myself and try and get some sleep. So I've been stationary for nearly 12 hours and it feels wonderful. I feel so much better. So now on the road and headed towards Narin. that is a sight for sore eyes.
So that took me through the next couple of days, and it was Narin that I was headed down into, not Batov, as I'd previously said on the video. It was a bit delusional at that stage, but rolling down into Narin, I'm so glad that I stopped just before it, the night before, because if I'd have pushed on, like my original plan was to get down into Narin, then it would have been very hard to leave again. You know, a night in a hotel, a shower, all that sort of stuff. With that frame of mind that I had, it would have been tough to leave. As it stood, I kind of rolled down into Narin in pretty good form, and I almost rode straight on through. But I decided to go and get a coffee, and then very quickly, sort of little bands of renegade Silk Road mountain race riders started coming out of the woodwork, and Narin got dubbed Scratch City. So to scratch from the race was to quit the race, and more people scratched in Narin than at any other place, and I can totally see why, because you've been out, you've done a long, hard journey already, and then you're faced with a bit of relative comfort. You know, there's hotels there, there's proper coffee, there's Wi-Fi, there's showers, and you just saw bunches of riders kind of milling around. Some of them had scratched, and some of these guys were still racing, and one of those guys there, he was just thinking about scratching at that point, which he did. But you know, one coffee turned into two, and then you said, "Oh, go on, then let's go for a meal." And you know, before long, I spent a couple of hours there. I managed to blag a shower, which was good, my first of the race. But no, I felt like that wasn't my time to stop, so I wanted to carry on, and I managed to get out of Narin with a little agreement that I had with Bas, one of the other riders, and that was based on the fact that it was going to be quite a remote, wild section that we were going into. There was a big plateau that sat about 4,000 metres, and it had some pretty notorious river crossings that we'd been warned about. So we thought it would be better going into that kind of environment, not just as a solo rider, but with someone else, at least in the vicinity, that, you know, if one person wasn't comfortable, they could wait and kind of meet the other coming through. So we had this agreement, and Bas and I kind of moved on together. And it's amazing. And I found it on so many different cycle trips and tours and travelling, is that when you decide to shine at the world shines back at you. So when you get a good feeling about what you're doing, all of a sudden, all the good stuff starts to happen. And this was definitely the feeling that we got. We slowed right down. We weren't pushing for time. We certainly weren't racing against each other, Bas and I. We were just riding, and the landscape changed. It turned into this beautiful mountain landscape, and you know, we started to get interactions with the locals, like that guy that stopped and was giving us fresh kumis, which is fermented horse milk, by the way. Yeah, we started to get all these amazing interactions that you get when you're not with your head down and just riding on through. And we spent a very chilly night up at altitude before sort of knocking the ice off our bikes in the morning. Pressing on up towards this plateau, we bumped into Colin the camel, who was a very curious camel. along the way. And yeah, we got up to this plateau. Actually, Bass and I rode. It seemed like we rode together, but he was faster on the flats and I was slightly faster on the climbs and the descents. So I'd not see him for half a day because he'd be riding along the flat, and then at the top of the climb I'd bump into him again. And it worked quite nicely like that. But we bumped into each other up at the top of this plateau just before what was written down on my little map of notes here as hard. And what that turned out to mean was that it was about 20 kilometres with no road at all. This was like the best that Scotland has to offer. Some bog and rock sections, rock gardens where you're just hauling your bike. And there was no real riding to be done, so we were just walking through this section. But we were concerned because we were up at 4,000 metres, it was going to be cold. So we wanted to drop down off that plateau, so we pushed on, and eventually got down off the plateau quite late at night, and this is where we woke up in the morning. Incidentally, that shepherd that came wandering past on his horse out in the middle of nowhere spoke perfect English. Turned out he'd worked in Saudi, and he's a Kyrgyz shepherd up on the hillside, so it was quite interesting chatting to him. But yeah, we were faced then with a long downhill down to checkpoint 3, which was a good thing.
So I'm up here out of Tosa, just into the last part of the route now. One big pass to go over, a plateau, and then we're into the sort of the final stretch. So yeah, feeling pretty wiped out, but relatively strong. Trying to press on up to the top. Hard day, such a good one. Man, it is hard to get moving anywhere quickly these days. Shouldn't be too far to finish, so we just try and go.
So most of this last section, after sort of a brief lunch stop at CP3, rode by myself. That was a particularly nasty pass, that one there, Tosa. And then carried on a largely kind of downhill trajectory towards the last big hill. And that last big hill had become infamous. You know, people were telling me that Shamshi Pass was going to be a 20-kilometre hike-a-bike. It was going to take you all day just to get over it. And these were the sort of rumours that were flying around. So it definitely didn't really feel like you were kind of nearly at the end. You still had a big challenge to get over. But certainly the feeling that I had after having kind of slowed down and decided that I wasn't really racing this race, after checkpoint 3, it became apparent that, you know, over half the riders had already dropped out. So if you were able to just keep going till the finish, then you were going to be in the top 50% of the field. So it kind of twigged with me that actually that would be quite a good achievement, and I'd quite like to do it. And in some ways, that decision, that sense of pressing on towards the end, that gave me my simplicity back again. That stopped me questioning why I was doing this, what the point was, what my intentions were, but actually gave me that simplicity, that focus of, let's just ride my bike till I get to the finish. And it started to feel like it was achievable. So Tosa Pass, I got very lucky on Tosa. I've seen some pictures of other people there with big, deep snowdrifts. I had pretty good weather going over, but it was a fantastic, you know, long, hard climb, but a fantastic environment to ride your bike up into. And had a bit of an emotional moment riding into the sunset that night. I'd properly wiped myself out, given all I could to that day, really, and had my frustrations, but then just hit this beautiful bit of gravel that just went through this deserted plateau into the sunset, and listened to my music, and it all became a bit much. And I take real value and strength from those experiences, and I think you need to go through those hardships to get there. And then rolled down into the last town, which was Kochkor. It was lovely to see there was all these bands of other riders that had scratched, and were all kind of hanging out, drinking coffee and things in Kochkor. And it was lovely to see friends. And I bumped back into Bass again, and at that stage we decided to roll out again together. But that didn't feel like it was going to be a trap, because it was so close to the finish. You knew that if you were still going, you were still going at that stage. So I stopped for a meal and then carried on up towards Shamshi Pass, which is down that road there. Incidentally, an intensely horrible headwind, which felt like it was probably the thing that was most likely to break me. But fortunately, I kind of managed to get through that and pushed into the last day. So Shamshi Pass in the last day, despite all the rumours and, you know, lots of people had lots of horrible tales to tell about hiking biking over Shamshi Pass, but for me this was my bread and butter. For me, this kind of mountain biking is what I love, and if it involves a bit of a push and a carry, then that's fine. It just means that there's somewhere good to get to on the other side of it. I absolutely adored riding over Shamshi Pass, and it gave me so much energy. Even though I was knackered after the previous 10 days worth of riding, I really hit my stride coming over here, and yeah, just relished every moment of it. You know, I'd felt like I deserved it, and it was tough. Of course, it was still tough. There was hard river crossing and there was hard passes to get over, but you know, I felt like I was close enough to the end that it was worth it. So getting over Shamshi, I actually bumped into a control car again, and this was the moment that they told me that the final 100 kilometres was not all downhill. And that actually there was 3 fairly sizable large hills to get over, and that it would be a really long day. This was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and they reckoned that I wouldn't get in till about midnight. So Bass passed me at this stage, and he said to me, he was like, right, okay, we've ridden together, but you know, today we race, tonight we drink beer. So I thought, okay, well, Bass, you can go and race. I'm not interested in racing. And then I kind of did some calculations in my head. And I worked out that if I took it easy, I would be getting in at about midnight, but if I really pushed it, then I'd get in for dinner. So, so that motivated me, and I kind of sped on towards the finish, and I'm glad I did, because getting into that beautiful, simplistic, flowing feeling that you get only really when you've emptied everything that you can do into a ride, and you're just flowing through the landscape was totally what I got on that last day, and rode hard into the night to get into the finish. So that was me finished, and I finished in 11 days, 11 hours and 45 minutes. As it turned out, I came in 8th overall in general classification, out of a total of only 30 riders that finished out of a field of 100 starters. I wasn't quite sure how I felt at that stage, and actually shortly after that picture was taken, when I was looking for something cool to say with it on Instagram, I found this quote from Theodore Roosevelt, and it said, "Nothing in the world is worth having or worth doing unless it means effort, pain, or difficulty." And I quite liked it. It sounded cool, so I put it down on next to this photo. And I've thought about it a little bit more since, and thought about what that means. And I think there's value in the effort, the pain, and the difficulty. But for me, in a lot of ways, part of that value is what you get after the effort, the pain, and the difficulty. You know, it's not always a fun thing that you're doing at the time, but having achieved it and having done it allows you to indulge in all the things that you appreciate again about life, whether or not that's just to sit on a chair, or to eat some proper food, or to have a beer. All these things that we can take for granted suddenly seem like fantastically important things, and I really felt like, you know, that's what I could take from it. I'd just like to read you one little extract from something I wrote just shortly after finishing the race, and it kind of explains a little bit about you know, why I suppose I did it. And it's I should have got my glasses on, hey. At times hang on. At times the draw to stop the whole ridiculous charade and freely tour around on my bike for the fun of it, was almost too strong, especially when I crossed paths with bands of other scratched riders who were doing just that. It seemed like a wholly sensible idea. But sometimes we don't need the sensible, we need the ridiculous. And what's more, we need to choose the ridiculous. Personally, through making this choice, I subjected myself to ecstatic highs and crushing lows, a good dollop of torturous boredom, and the occasional blissful sensation of effortlessly flowing through a landscape and culture of magical, timeless beauty and simplicity. And so, on rolling into that finish camp after 11 and a half days of feral living, my overriding sensation was one of having finally scratched an itch, of finding a way to give my soul what it needed, and letting me breathe a contented sigh, and just for a moment, no longer scanning the horizon in search of the big what next. And that is a hell of a thing to find. And I think that, for me, was, that became the why. You know, it was allowing me to have achieved something that I felt like I needed to do, and then to not have any plans. Everyone kept on asking me afterwards, what's next? What's next? It's always the first question. And right now, I feel quite contented in the fact of what I've done. I'm not saying that that's not going to change, and I'm not going to want to go out and have more adventures and do different things, but I don't feel like I need to push myself or prove myself to myself right now. I feel quite contented in what I've done. So finding that peace, finding that kind of contentment was not that I really knew it at the start, but that was the why. And this is what I've hopefully ended up with. So thanks very much for listening to me. We've probably got time for a couple of questions afterwards, but if anyone wants to come and chat about any more specifics or geek out about any kind of kit choices or anything like that, then please come and find me afterwards or get in touch with me at Adventure Pedlars if you're at all interested in anything similar. So thanks very much, guys. Do we have time for a question or two? If we've got any questions? Anyone?
Can I ask a question?
Go on.
You didn't really mention navigation in that talk, but obviously from the imagery you were in some incredibly wild and isolated places.
Yeah.
Was that a challenge, or was that actually a relatively straightforward part of it?
Yeah, it was a good question. It was relatively straightforward given the format of what we're doing. So the self-supported race format usually involves you getting a GPS track and you having to take a spot tracker with you. So the GPS track you load into your device, Garmin or phone or whatever you want to use, and you just follow the line on the map. So as long as it works, navigation's pretty straightforward. You're just following that line on the maps. And obviously from a safety point of view, you're being satellite tracked as well. It was one of the big draws to that race is that someone else had gone out and researched that route, and I wasn't having to go down 100 different dead ends to look for the nice bits. So yeah, that was one of the beauties, is finding those kind of events so that you've just given a route, and I didn't really have to think about it at all. So yeah, no, that's why I didn't mention it.
Were there any points when you did that, when you looked at what the Garmin was saying and looked at the hill and went, you've got to be kidding?
Yeah, although it kind of, I suppose what it teaches you is this sense of acceptance. You don't really have much of a choice. I work quite a lot with young people and take them up mountains and things like that. And what I always kind of say to them is like, you've got two choices. You can either decide this, you want to call it a day and go back down, which is a choice. You can carry on, or you can stop. And stopping, well, you can't do that indefinitely, so that's not really a choice either. So really you're down to one, which is, you've just got to carry on. And if you've got to carry on, you might as well accept it. So I would try and go into my own little special place and sit there counting my breaths as I kind of went up just to kind of distract myself. But no, I never got angry at the route. A lot of other riders did. They were like, "Oh, Nelson, what have you done?" Like, blamed him personally for the brutal things that he was giving. And I kind of always found that was an interesting lesson in acceptance. So maybe something that you can take into other parts of life. I don't know. Hello?
How much weight did you do doing it?
I didn't weigh myself, but visually a lot. Like, I was pretty skinny when I finished. Although I have done a very good effort of putting it all back on again. Certainly in the days following. I didn't really leave this yurt. After this picture was taken, I basically stayed there for the next 4 days, drinking beer and eating crisps. And one of the lovely things actually was that, so many other people started to come in. When I arrived, there was just 5 tired-looking guys in the corner. But then after a while, other riders started to come in. People were finishing, and then some of the scratch riders arrived. And there were 70 or 80 of us there at the finish. And so we were just there eating these fantastic meals and just putting on lots of weight. And I've continued to do the same thing for the last couple of years. I should probably stop now.
I was going to say, did you remember when you thought, I've really looked this up in terms of like the supplies? So you were going through towns where you had to sort of resupply at times because you can only carry so much, presumably. And did you ever seriously get close to running out, or thinking I've messed this up? Or?
No, not really. Again, a lot of my kit choices, and I could go into a lot of detail on my kit choice, but was quite conservative, and one of those things was food. So I took probably 6 days worth of food on me at the start, which meant that whatever I could resupply with, that was good, but I would always have at least 1 meal or 2 meals sort of left in the bottom of my pannier. And I got to the finish, having pretty much that last 100k, I just kind of put everything that I had into me so I could keep that energy going to the end. But yeah, I still had my kind of emergency food shoved down to the bottom of my pack. So I never felt like I was going to get too caught out on the food front, and the resupply was actually better than I expected. Like there was more places than I thought there was going to be. Cool. So we'll carry on. Yeah.
Great. Thanks very much.
Cheers.